to the final part of our analysis of Act 1, Scene 7. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at how Lady Macbeth has persuaded Macbeth and how she is able to make sure he does what he is supposed to do. What we are learning today, we need to have a look at how does Lady Macbeth plot Duncan's murder. What I'm looking for from all of you is to understand what happens at the end of Act 1, Scene 7. We should understand the dialogue, understand the relationship that is happening on stage, and we need to consider how Lady Macbeth is presented differently to Macbeth, because you probably noticed that these two characters have very different outlooks. They both want the same thing, but one of them wants to hold on to their moral goodness, the other one is willing to shatter all morals in favour of personal gain. At the start of Act 1, Scene 7, once Macbeth had done his contemplation, he came to the decision that he will proceed no further in this business. After that, we looked at how Lady Macbeth tried to unpick his argument, tried to insult his masculinity, telling him that he is not a strong enough person if he doesn't have the conviction to actually do what he promised. And she uses her marriage against him, saying, well, that's how I'm going to consider your love for me. I'll consider it equally fickle. So what we see next is how Lady Macbeth continues to reassure her husband, because Macbeth is worried, Macbeth is concerned. He's worried that they're not going to get away with this. And that's evident from this line where we start off. It says, if we should fail, consider how weak he sounds here. Consider how worried and how frail he's sounding. There's evident doubt in what he's saying and a clear lack of confidence. And we can juxtapose that really clearly with the strength of conviction that Lady Macbeth has shown throughout. Remember all of that horrible, visceral, violent language, the imagery of the baby's brain being dashed. That is completely opposite to how weak Macbeth sounds when he says, if we should fail. Lady Macbeth responds to this frailty and this vulnerability with the words, we fail. What she's doing is something that she's done all the way through this scene so far. She takes what Macbeth says and then uses it herself. So Macbeth just said, if we should fail, Lady Macbeth says, we fail. Now it's worth mentioning at this point that in different versions of the text we have a different punctuation mark. In this version, the one that you have on your screen, we have a question mark here, which makes Lady Macbeth say it like, we fail, almost as if she's never even entertained the possibility of failing. She's absolutely resolute in her confidence. If it was an exclamation mark instead, it would suggest that she's entirely willing to take the risk. If we should fail, we fail. That's how confident she is. And in the next line, we realise that she has the plan needed in order to make sure she does not fail. She says, but screw your courage to the sticking place and we'll not fail. What she wants Macbeth to do is to be absolutely sure in what he's doing and to take the confidence and to complete the task without any wavering. But notice the personal pronoun being used. It's all based on the weakness of Macbeth. She's not worried about her own conviction. She knows that she has the power to do this. She's asking her husband to not be the weak link. And she's saying, but screw your courage to the sticking place and we'll not fail. Now the sticking place can be one of two things. It could be part of a crossbow or it could be part of a musical instrument. If we take that idea of the crossbow, if a crossbow fires, then the bolt goes absolutely straight. Almost like Lady Macbeth is suggesting that you need to be like a crossbow. You need to be something that when it fires, it doesn't falter, it doesn't back out, it doesn't worry, it just goes forward, it goes absolutely straight until it hits the target with devastating force. And she says, and we'll not fail. What she's saying is that Macbeth is the only reason why this plan would fail. She is absolutely confident that if Macbeth can just pull himself together and commit the act, that there can be no failure. It shows there's no doubt at all from Lady Macbeth and that she is absolutely assured. And then what we have is her telling us what the plot is, what she's going to do to make sure success. And she says, when Duncan is asleep, whereto the rather shall his day's hard journey soundly invite him? His two chamberlains will I, with wine and wassail, so convince that memory, the water of the brain, shall be a fume, and the receipt of reason a limbeck only. She's telling us what her plot is going to be. Now she says that if they're going to strike, they need to wait until he is asleep. And what she's suggesting is that they should exploit his vulnerability. He is in a weak position. Duncan doesn't realise this. He believes he's walked into a place of loyalty. However, this is a woman who is willing to strike when he is at his weakest. Think about how different this type of execution is compared to Macbeth's killing of soldiers on the battlefield. On the battlefield, it was entirely equal, man against man, sword against sword. Here, Lady Macbeth is presenting a stealthy type of murder. She then says, whereto the rather shall his day's hard journey soundly invite him? Duncan has been on a hard journey. He's come back from the battlefield, he's just won, he's going to be tired. And he says his two chamberlains, the two soldiers who will accompany him to his bedroom, his two guards. She then says, will I, with wine and wassail, so convince that memory? She uses the first person personal pronoun because Lady Macbeth is going to take an active role in this murder. Again, subverting the gender stereotype for a woman or a wife during the Jacobean era. So she wants to take part in this. She doesn't want to just let Macbeth do what needs to be done. It's almost like she doesn't trust him. She knows that she has a part to play and she's willing to accept that responsibility. And she is going to drug them, essentially. The word wine suggests she's going to intoxicate these guards. She's going to drug them. This is not the honourable warfare that we saw in Act 1, Scene 2. This part of her speech, then, is detailing a very clear, very precise plan so that Macbeth realises that it cannot go wrong unless it isn't executed properly. So her plan is wait until Duncan goes to bed, wait until he falls to sleep. Then the two guards who are waiting with him are going to be drugged with wine, and their thoughts and their memory is going to turn into some sort of fog, like a smoke coming out of a chimney. They're not going to be able to act properly. They're not going to be able to remember what happened the night before. So she is very clearly not just planning how to achieve the murder, but how to get away with the murder as well. She continues telling us what her plan is. She then says that when in swinish sleep their drenched natures lie as in a death, what cannot you and I perform upon the unguarded Duncan? What not put upon his spongy officers, who shall bear the guilt of our great quell? So when she says when in swinish sleep, she's describing their sleep like pigs. So when they're sleeping like pigs, and that's the description that people often use when it comes to the way people are sleeping. But for me, the way she describes them as swinish almost makes their sleep sound inhuman. And it is inhuman because it's created by Lady Macbeth. She's the reason why these guards will fall into such a deep slumber. And it also reminds me that swines are pigs. Almost, pigs are designed to be butchered. a really horrible image, much like these guards. She's quite happy for them to be butchered when it looks like they've killed their king. So she says, when in swinish sleep their drenched natures lie as in a death. And she uses the simile, when they're sleeping it looks like they're dead. And that's the foreshadowing. She knows that these two innocent people are going to be killed for their supposed treachery. She's happy for these innocent people to be killed. She then says, what cannot you and I perform upon the unguarded Duncan? Think about how powerful she feels. She feels like once these two guards are sleeping, we can do whatever we want. And that's quite a dangerous thought for a character in a Shakespearean play. When characters believe like they're above the law of God, then that character is often considered a very evil character because they don't quite respect the laws and rules of nature. But it also shows how complicit she is in this crime. She knows that this is not just Macbeth who is going to be committing this crime. She is just as important a part in it. So what cannot you and I perform upon the unguarded Duncan? And again, this makes this murder sound very dishonourable. This is not two people meeting each other on the battlefield, the way normal wars or battles are conducted. This is two powerful people having power over someone completely unguarded, completely vulnerable. She uses that rhetorical question too to really highlight the power. Then she says, what not put upon his spongy officers who shall bear the guilt of our great quell? She is entirely comfortable with the fact that these two innocent people are going to be used to place the guilt upon them. She's quite happy to destroy other people if she is to gain personally. When she describes these officers as spongy officers, it's almost like these officers are sponges and they're going to absorb all of that guilt upon them, leaving Lady Macbeth and Macbeth entirely guilt-free, or at least looking guilt-free. If we think of the imagery of a sponge, sponges attract things, sponges soak things up. They're going to soak up the guilt, metaphorically, but they're going to literally soak up the blood because she's going to douse them in blood. Macbeth realises the horrific nature of her plan, and at first says this, bring forth men children only, for thy undaunted mettle should compose nothing but males. He questions how such a woman can come up with such a heinous act or a heinous plan. He's glad that his wife hasn't given them a daughter, because a daughter born with those types of characteristics would be monstrous. He then asks, will it not be received when we have marked with blood those sleepy two of his own chamber, and used their very daggers, that they have done it? He then asks her to reiterate the plan. He questions, is this exactly the plan that you've come up with? Because he says, if when these soldiers wake up and they see that their blood is smeared all over themselves, they're going to assume that they've done it, and all of the other soldiers are going to think that they're the people who are guilty, even though they are innocent. And he's actually horrified by the type of dark plan that she seems to have come up with. When he says bring forth men children only, he believes that this type of act women should never witness, and his wife shouldn't be able to devise such a strategy. And he's really glad that he has never had a daughter, because a daughter who inherits these types of characteristics wouldn't be the type of daughter that anyone would be proud of. And he says, for thy undaunted mettle should compose nothing but males. The type of conviction that Lady Macbeth seems to have, this undaunted mettle, is frightening. Women are not supposed to have these types of feelings or have these types of thoughts. The latter part is him clarifying the plan, because Lady Macbeth is the architect of this scheme. She is the person who puts it all together, and then Macbeth is the one that needs to follow it. When asked for clarification, Lady Macbeth says, who dares receive it other, as we shall make our griefs and clamour roar upon his death? Lady Macbeth reveals that nobody would dare to question them. That's how confident she is in her plan. She sounds arrogant here. She sounds like she is so sure that she's going to get away with this, that she has no doubts at all in her plan. She then tells us why she'll get away with it. They'll get away with it because as soon as people wake up and they find the king dead, she knows that they're going to have to act in outrage and with grief. What happens after the murder is that they need to make sure they seem innocent in the way that they act. In a subsequent video, we'll have a look at Machiavellian characteristics. I won't explain that now, but this is the type of person who knows that the way you act when guilty will have an effect on whether or not you can get away with that act. So she understands your appearance is very, very important, and that sometimes your appearance should hide what has actually happened. If we think back to the innocent flower and the serpent underneath it from earlier, it shows that your appearance is incredibly important. You must conceal the way you feel. She then says, roar upon his death. So when Duncan wakes up, they're going to roar. They're going to make all sorts of noise to make sure that nobody will question them. Macbeth then says these simple words, I am settled. Macbeth has decided, okay, I will kill the king. It's a very short period since he said, I will proceed no further in this business. It's only 40 lines of Lady Macbeth's speech that changes, we shall proceed no further in this business, to I am settled. Lady Macbeth has successfully persuaded her husband. She's done that through manipulation, through challenging his authority, challenging his masculinity, using her marriage against him, expertly crafting a foolproof plan. But Macbeth bends. He breaks. He was resolute, I am not going to kill the king, and now we have I am settled. He agrees to do it. He says, I am settled, and bend up each a corporal agent to this terrible feat. Away, and mock the time with fairest show. False face must hide what the false heart doth know. He realizes that what they are about to do is wrong, and he is willing to now commit these terrible deeds. He leaves behind his moral goodness, and in favour decides to get more through his ambition. He's going to invest himself entirely in these plans now. He's going to call up all strength and he's going to execute the plan. He's not going to waver. He knows what he needs to do. He then says, away and mock the time with fairest shows. And this reveals that he understands that he must put an act up in front of Duncan. And the reason why he needs to act in a certain way is to avoid suspicion. The final line I think is really interesting because he mentions how he must have a false face. Our faces are supposed to be open. We're supposed to reveal the way we feel. If you think back to Lady Macbeth's criticism of Macbeth, she believed his face was too much like a book. What he now realizes is that he must create a facade to hide those machinations of his mind. He must make sure the way he looks on the outside conceals what is happening on the inside. This is exactly what Lady Macbeth wanted from him. False face must hide what the false heart doth know. Again, we have imagery of concealment and stealth. He is going to be just as cunning as his wife, and he's going to deceive. This is a very different Macbeth to what we saw in Act 1, Scene 2. Finally, I'll mention we have lots of alliteration at the end of this section. With fairest show, false face must hide what the false heart doth know. That alliteration seems to echo the chanting that we heard at the start of this play. We had foul is fair and fair is foul, hover through the fog and the filthy air. Lots of F sounds being used. And that makes a very ominous feeling at the end of this scene, now that they've officially decided to kill the king. It also gives us that sense of dread as well. Now, I think this alliteration reveals that Macbeth knows how evil killing the king is going to be. It's an unnatural act, he should not be doing it, and yet he pushes himself to do it anyway. By looking at Act 1, Scene 7 then, we see the next part of Lady Macbeth's abilities. At the end of these 3 videos, I believe you're in a position to answer these questions. I'm not going to ask you to literally answer them now, but these are the types of things that I believe have been revealed through these videos. First of all, why does Macbeth decide not to commit regicide? At the start of the scene, he decides not to. I believe you're in a position to answer that question. I think you know his reasons for not wanting to do it. How does Lady Macbeth react to Macbeth's refusal? I think you have been able to pick up on the tone that she uses and the techniques she uses. I think you could answer, how does Lady Macbeth persuade Macbeth to change his mind? I think you could identify which points she makes are strongest and how she reacts. And then finally, how are Macbeth and Lady Macbeth presented differently? I'm sure you've all picked up on the juxtaposition between these 2 characters, their level of moral goodness, their ability, their decisions. I think you can pick up on quite a few differences between these 2 characters. However, there's one question that I believe you're in a much better position to answer, and that's the question that we are going to answer for our assessment. Examine how Shakespeare presents the strengths and weaknesses of Lady Macbeth. I want you to think really carefully about some of the details from this video, from Act 1, Scene 7, and I want you to make notes on where you think her strengths lie. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you all next time.